The tracks in the mud were wrong. Everything about them was wrong. They stretched longer than any boot Liam Carter had ever seen, wider than his horse's hooves, and pressed so deep into the earth that rainwater had pooled in each print like small ponds. But these weren't boot prints, and they sure weren't from any horse. Standing at the edge of his cattle corral, Liam knelt beside the largest track and spread his weathered hand across it. His fingers barely reached from one side to the other. The shape was all wrong too, rounded at the front with deep claw marks gouged into the mud ahead of each toe. 4 toes. Each claw mark as long as his thumb. 3 of his best cattle were missing. Not stolen. There were no human tracks, no hoof prints from horses carrying rustlers. Just these impossible prints leading from his corral toward the dark line of swampland that bordered his property. The same swampland he'd avoided for 30 years of ranching in this territory. Liam rose slowly, his knees creaking like old leather. He'd seen bear tracks before, mountain lion prints, even the massive paw marks of the wolves that sometimes came down from the northern hills. This was something else entirely. Something that had walked on 4 legs but left prints deeper than his prize bull would make. Something with claws that could tear through fence posts like they were made of paper. The morning sun climbed higher, but the air still carried the chill of dawn and something else, a smell he couldn't place. Musky and wet, like the bottom of a stagnant pond, mixed with something that made his stomach turn. The smell seemed to drift from the direction of the swamp, carried on a breeze that rustled the tall grass between his property and that dark water. Behind him, the farmhouse door creaked open. Sophia stepped onto the porch, her dress neat despite the early hour, coffee cup steaming in her hands. "Breakfast is ready," she called, but her voice carried an edge of concern. She'd noticed his absence from their bed before dawn, heard him moving around the house with the quiet urgency that meant trouble. "In a minute," Liam called back, but his eyes remained fixed on the tracks. They led in a straight line toward the swamp, as if whatever made them knew exactly where it was going, as if it had been here before. He followed the trail for 50 yards, noting how the prints grew deeper and more defined as they moved away from his corral. Whatever had taken his cattle hadn't been struggling with their weight. It had carried them easily, confidently, leaving a path that any fool could follow. Any fool stupid enough to follow it into the swamp. Liam stopped at the tree line where solid ground gave way to marshy soil and standing water. The tracks continued into the dark water, disappearing beneath the surface where cypress trees created a canopy so thick that noon looked like twilight. Somewhere in that darkness, ripples moved across the water in a pattern that had nothing to do with wind. Something was still in there. Something big enough to take 3 full-grown cattle. Something that wasn't afraid to come onto his land in broad daylight and take what it wanted. And from the look of those tracks, it was planning to come back. The coffee had gone cold in Sophia's hands by the time Liam returned to the house. She set the cup down with a sharp clink against the wooden table, her green eyes searching his face for answers he didn't have. 3 head missing, he said, settling into his chair across from her. The kitchen felt too warm after the morning chill, too normal after what he'd seen outside. "Tracks lead straight into the swamp. Rustlers?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Liam shook his head. "No horse prints. No boot prints either." He paused, studying the grain in the wooden table. "These tracks, I've never seen anything like them." Sophia's hand tightened around her coffee cup. In 15 years of marriage, she'd learned to read the worry lines around her husband's eyes. This was different from the usual concerns about cattle prices or drought. This was the look he got when something threatened their family. "How big?" she asked quietly. "Big enough to carry off a full-grown steer without dragging it." Liam met her gaze. "Whatever it is, it's not afraid of coming close to the house." From the back room came the sound of Zeke moving around, getting dressed for another day of helping with ranch work. At 16, their son had his father's broad shoulders and his mother's stubborn streak. He also had a young man's certainty that he could handle anything the frontier threw at him. "We need to talk to Noah," Sophia said. "He knows those swamps better than anyone." Liam nodded. Noah Brooks had been tracking and hunting in this territory since before Liam had claimed his land. If anyone would know what kind of animal could leave tracks like those, it would be Noah. The problem was that Noah lived a hard day's ride north, and Liam didn't like the idea of leaving Sophia and Zeke alone with those tracks still fresh outside. A sharp bang from the back room interrupted his thoughts. Zeke appeared in the kitchen doorway, his rifle slung over his shoulder and his hunting pack already strapped to his back. "I heard you talking," he said, his young face set with determination. I'll track whatever took our cattle. Can't be worse than the wolves we dealt with last winter. You'll do no such thing, Sophia said, rising from her chair. That swamp isn't like the northern hills. It's dangerous enough without some unknown animal prowling through it. Zeke's jaw tightened. I'm not a child anymore, Ma. We can't just let something steal our cattle and do nothing about it. Liam studied his son, seeing himself at that age, full of fire, and convinced that courage alone could solve any problem. But the memory of those massive tracks was still fresh in his mind, along with the unnatural depth of the prints and the smell that had drifted from the swamp. Your mother's right, he said finally. This isn't a job for hunting parties or young men with more courage than sense. Then what do we do? Zeke demanded. Wait for it to come back? Wait for it to take more cattle? Or maybe wait for it to decide it wants something besides beef? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a dying fire. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, but the shadows from the swamp seemed to stretch longer across their land. Somewhere in that dark water, something was feeding on their livestock, something that left tracks deeper than any animal Liam had ever encountered. And if Zeke was right about one thing, it was this. Whatever it was, it would be back. The argument might have continued all morning if not for the sound that drifted across the ranch just after noon. It started low, like distant thunder, but thunder didn't rise and fall in that rhythmic pattern. Thunder didn't echo with the wet, guttural undertone that made the hair on Liam's arms stand on end. All three of them froze in the kitchen, coffee cups and harsh words forgotten. The sound came again, longer this time, rolling across the open ground between the swamp and their house like a challenge thrown down by something that had never learned to fear human beings. Dear Lord, Sophia whispered, her face pale as flour. Liam was already moving toward the window, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He pulled back the curtain and peered across his land toward the dark line of trees that marked the swamp's edge. Nothing moved in the tall grass, but the cattle in the far pasture had bunched together near the fence line farthest from the water, their heads turned toward the sound with the wide-eyed alertness of prey animals sensing a predator. It's calling, Zeke said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's calling for something. The sound came a third time, and this time Liam could pinpoint its direction, not from the deep swamp where he'd expected, but from the shallow water near the edge of his property, close enough that he could see ripples spreading across the surface where something large had just moved beneath it. It's hunting, Liam said, his mouth dry as dust. And it's not finished. He turned from the window to find both Sophia and Zeke staring at him with identical expressions of barely controlled fear. In all their years on this ranch, they'd faced wolves, bears, drought, and the occasional band of desperate men looking for easy money. But this was different. This was something that announced its presence with sounds that belonged in nightmares, not on a working ranch in broad daylight. We're riding to Noah's place, Liam said, his decision made. All of us. Right now. Liam, Sophia began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. I'm not leaving you and Zeke here alone with that thing prowling around. We pack what we need and we go. What about the rest of the cattle? Zeke asked. We can't just abandon them. Liam looked out the window again. His remaining cattle were still pressed against the far fence, as far from the swamp as they could get. Smart animals. Smarter than their owner, maybe, who'd spent the morning debating what to do instead of getting his family to safety. The cattle that are left are in the far pasture, he said. Whatever's in that swamp, we'll have to cross a lot of open ground to reach them. That should buy us time. But even as he said it, Liam wasn't sure he believed it. Something that could carry off a full-grown steer without leaving drag marks wasn't likely to be deterred by distance. And something that called out in broad daylight wasn't afraid of being seen. The sound came again, closer this time. Close enough that the windows rattled in their frames. Pack light, Liam said, already heading for the back room where he kept his rifle and ammunition. We leave in 10 minutes. Behind him, Sophia was already gathering supplies with the efficient movements of a woman who'd learned not to argue when her husband's voice carried that particular edge. Zeke stood frozen by the window, staring toward the swamp with the fascination of youth confronting something beyond its understanding. Outside, the calling stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that felt more ominous than the sound itself. In that silence, something splashed in the shallow water near the property line. Something big enough to send waves lapping against the shore. Something that was no longer content to stay hidden in the deep swamp. They were 3 miles from the ranch when Liam realized they were being followed. The first sign was his horse's ears. constantly swiveling backward, nostrils flaring with each gust of wind that carried scents from behind them. The second sign was the way the trail seemed too quiet. No birds called from the trees lining the path, no small animals rustled through the underbrush. Even the insects had gone silent, as if something had passed this way recently that made every living thing want to hide. "Pa," Zeke said quietly, his young voice tight with controlled fear. "Something's tracking us." Liam had hoped his son wouldn't notice. Sophia rode between them, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the trail ahead, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew too. They all knew. "Keep riding," Liam said, his hand resting on the rifle across his saddle. "Don't look back." But he looked back. What he saw made his blood run cold. The creature wasn't trying to hide. It moved through the shallow water that ran parallel to the trail, keeping pace with their horses effortlessly. Liam caught glimpses of it between the trees, something massive and low to the ground, moving with the fluid grace of a predator that had never learned to fear anything. The size of it defied belief. From snout to tail, it had to be close to 20 feet long, its body thick and powerful as a fallen tree trunk. Its hide was dark as swamp mud, covered in scales that looked like armor plating. But it was the eyes that made Liam's hands shake on the reins. Cold, intelligent eyes that tracked their movement with the patience of something that knew it could catch them whenever it chose. "How fast can these horses run?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Not fast enough," Liam replied honestly. "Not for long enough." The trail ahead split into two paths, one continuing north toward Noah's place through open country, the other veering east into a stretch of rocky ground where the water couldn't follow. Both paths led away from the creature, but Liam knew it wouldn't matter. Something that could move through water and land with equal ease wouldn't be stopped by a change in terrain. As if reading his thoughts, the creature suddenly surged forward in the water, closing the distance between them with frightening speed. Liam could hear the splash of its movement now, the sound of something massive displacing water with each stroke of its powerful tail. "Ride hard," he shouted, spurring his horse forward. The horses needed no encouragement. They could smell the predator now, and every instinct they possessed screamed at them to run. The three riders thundered along the trail, hooves pounding against the packed earth, but behind them the splashing grew louder. The creature was gaining on them. Liam risked another look back and saw it leaving the water, hauling its massive bulk onto the muddy bank with movements that were surprisingly quick for something so large. It moved like a giant lizard, its belly low to the ground, powerful legs driving it forward with mechanical precision. "The rocks!" Zeke shouted, pointing toward the eastern path. "It can't follow us up there." Maybe not, but Liam wasn't sure they could make it that far. The creature was less than 100 yards behind them now, and closing fast. Its jaws were open, revealing teeth like railroad spikes, each one longer than a man's hand. The rocky path lay 50 yards ahead. The creature was 30 yards behind and moving faster than any animal that size had a right to move. It was going to be close, too close, and if they didn't make it to those rocks, Noah Brooks would never know what had happened to the Carter family. They reached the rocky slope with seconds to spare. The horses scrambled up the loose stones, their hooves sliding and striking sparks as they climbed toward higher ground. Behind them, the creature hit the base of the slope with enough force to shake pebbles loose from the rock face. Liam turned in his saddle and watched the massive predator test the rocky terrain with one clawed foot. The stones shifted under its weight but held. For a moment he thought it might follow them up anyway, but something about the unstable ground seemed to give it pause. The creature circled the base of the slope instead, its cold eyes never leaving them. It was learning, Liam realized with growing dread. Testing their escape route, memorizing the terrain. This wasn't just a hungry animal following its next meal. This was something that could think, plan, adapt. "It's not leaving," Sophia said, her voice barely carrying over the wind that whistled through the rocks above them. She was right. The creature had settled into a patient crouch at the bottom of the slope, its massive head resting on its front legs like a cat, waiting outside a mouse hole. It could afford to wait. They couldn't stay on these rocks forever. "There!" Zeke pointed toward a thin column of smoke rising from a valley beyond the rocky ridge. "That's gotta be Noah's place." The smoke was maybe 2 miles away across rough country. Under normal circumstances, it would be an easy ride. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Liam doubted the creature would simply let them walk away. A sharp crack echoed across the rocks as a rifle shot split the afternoon air. The bullet struck the stone near the creature's head, sending fragments flying. The massive predator jerked back, more surprised than hurt, and turned toward the source of the shot. Noah Brooks emerged from behind a cluster of boulders 50 yards away, his weathered face grim as winter. The old hunter worked the lever of his rifle and fired again, this shot striking the creature in the shoulder. The bullet bounced off its armored hide like a pebble thrown against a barn door. "Rifles won't stop it!" Noah shouted up to them. "Get down here and follow me!" The creature had turned its full attention to Noah now, recognizing him as the greater threat. It began moving toward the hunter with that same terrifying speed they'd witnessed on the trail, its massive jaws opening to reveal those railroad-spiked teeth. Noah fired twice more, backing toward a narrow gap between two large rocks. The bullets did nothing except anger the creature, but they bought him enough time to reach cover. The predator slammed into the rocks where Noah had disappeared, its claws scraping against stone as it tried to force its massive bulk through the opening. "Now!" Liam shouted. They spurred their horses down the slope, taking a different path while the creature was distracted. The horses picked their way carefully over the loose rock, but Liam could hear the sounds of Noah's fight echoing from the gap. More rifle shots, the scrape of claws on stone, and underneath it all, that low, rumbling call that made his skin crawl. They reached the bottom of the slope just as Noah emerged from the other side of the gap, his rifle empty and his face streaked with sweat. The creature was still trying to force its way through the rocks, but its massive shoulders were too wide for the opening. "This way," Noah called, waving them toward his horse tied behind another boulder. "But we need to move fast. That thing's smarter than it looks, and it won't stay trapped for long." As if to prove his point, the sounds from the gap changed. Instead of trying to force its way through, the creature was backing out, already looking for another route around the rocks. "What is it?" Sophia asked as they gathered around Noah. The old hunter's eyes were hard as flint. "Something that shouldn't exist," he said. "Something that's been sleeping in the deep swamp for longer than any of us have been alive." "How do we kill it?" Liam asked. Noah looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "I'm not sure we can." Noah's cabin sat in a clearing 2 miles from the rocks, but it felt like a fortress under siege. Through the small windows, they could see the creature circling the edge of the tree line, never coming close enough for a clear shot, but never leaving either. It had been there for 3 hours, testing their defenses, learning their routines. "My grandfather told stories about something like this," Noah said, cleaning his rifle for the 4th time since they'd arrived. "Said the old-timers called it the Swamp King, biggest predator these parts ever knew." Liam studied the man who'd saved their lives. Noah was past 60, his hair gray as winter clouds, but his hands were steady and his eyes sharp as a hawk's. If anyone could help them survive this, it would be him. "How did they deal with it back then?" Sophia asked from her position by the window. "They didn't," Noah replied grimly. "They moved on. They found new territory, left the swamp to whatever lived there." "We can't just leave," Zeke protested. "That's our ranch, our home." Noah looked at the young man with something that might have been sympathy. "Son, some fights aren't worth winning. Some things are better left alone." But Liam was studying the maps spread across Noah's table, hand-drawn charts showing every stream, every trail, every piece of high ground for 50 miles around. The swamp was marked in dark ink, a sprawling mass of water and mud that covered nearly a quarter of the territory. "It's territorial," Liam said slowly. "It took our cattle because we built too close to its hunting grounds, but it followed us here because we ran. Now it sees us as a threat, or prey," Noah added darkly. Through the window, Zeke called out softly, "It's moving." They all turned to watch as the massive creature emerged from the tree line, moving with that same fluid grace they'd witnessed during the chase. In the late afternoon light, they could see it clearly for the first time. Every scale, every claw, every tooth in its massive head. "Sweet Lord," Sophia whispered. "How is something that big even possible?" "Swamps are old places," Noah said, "full of things that found ways to survive when the world was different. Most of them stayed hidden, kept to themselves. This one didn't." The creature approached the cabin slowly, its cold eyes fixed on the structure. When it reached the edge of the clearing, it stopped and let out that low, rumbling call they'd heard earlier. The sound vibrated through the wooden walls, making dust fall from the ceiling beams. "It's challenging us," Liam realized, "telling us to come out and face it." "Then maybe we should," Zeke said, his young voice tight with anger and fear. "Maybe we should stop running and start fighting." Noah turned from the window, his expression grave. Boy, that thing is 20 feet of muscle, teeth, and armor. Bullets bounce off it like rainwater. What exactly do you propose we fight it with? Liam studied the maps again, his mind working through possibilities. The creature was intelligent, but it was still an animal. It had instincts, patterns, weaknesses. Everything that lived could be killed. The trick was finding how. Fire, he said suddenly. Animals fear fire more than anything else. You want to burn down half the territory? Noah asked. Not the territory. Just enough to drive it back into the deep swamp where it belongs. Outside, the creature called again, closer this time. Close enough that they could hear its claws scraping against the wooden walls of the cabin. It's not going to wait much longer, Sophia said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide now. Liam looked at his family, then at Noah. 3 lives depending on his decision. Their ranch, their future, their very survival hanging in the balance. The creature's massive head appeared at the window, one cold eye staring directly at him through the glass. Time had run out for planning. The plan was desperate, dangerous, and probably suicidal. But it was the only plan they had. The old logging trail runs along the ridge above Dead Man's Gulch, Noah explained, his finger tracing the route on his map. If we can lure it there, we can use the terrain against it. Liam studied the crude drawing. Dead Man's Gulch was a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides. The kind of place where a creature that size would have limited room to maneuver. The bottom was filled with dead timber from old flash floods, dry as tinder after the hot summer. How do we get it to follow us there? Sophia asked. We make ourselves irresistible, Zeke said grimly. We become bait. The creature had withdrawn from the cabin as darkness fell, but they could still hear it moving through the trees, circling, waiting. It knew they were trapped, and it had all the patience in the world. I'll ride out first, Liam said. Draw it away from the cabin. Once it's following me, you 3 take the back trail to the gulch. Like hell, Noah snorted. You've never been through that swamp country in the dark. You'll be lost before you've gone a mile. Then you ride out, Liam said. No. Sophia's voice cut through their argument like a blade. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Outside, something heavy crashed through the underbrush. The creature was moving again, circling closer to the cabin. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, they could see its eyes reflecting the lamplight, 2 cold stars in the darkness. Noah pulled a bundle of torches from his supplies, each one soaked in coal oil and wrapped with strips of cloth. Fire's the only thing that's ever made wild animals back down, he said. If we're going to do this, we'll need all the flame we can carry. The sound of splintering wood came from the cabin's back wall. The creature was testing the structure, looking for weak points, finding them. It's not going to wait for morning, Liam said, grabbing 2 of the torches. We go now. They moved to the front door, weapons ready and torches prepared. Noah had his rifle loaded with the last of his ammunition. Liam carried his own rifle and a hunting knife that seemed pitifully small compared to what they were facing. Zeke held a torch in one hand and a heavy axe in the other, his young face set with grim determination. Sophia checked the small pistol she carried. 6 shots that probably wouldn't even scratch the creature's hide, but it made her feel better to have it. The crashing sounds from the back of the cabin grew louder. Whatever the creature was doing back there, it was working. Soon it would break through and they'd be trapped inside with no room to run. On 3, Liam whispered, his hand on the door latch. We light the torches, mount up, and ride hard for the gulch. Stay together no matter what happens. The back wall of the cabin groaned under tremendous pressure. Wood began to splinter and crack. 1, Liam counted. A massive claw punched through the wooden planks, sending fragments flying across the room. 2, the creature's head appeared in the hole it had torn, those railroad-spiked teeth gleaming in the lamplight. 3, Liam threw open the front door and they burst into the night. Torches blazing, horses snorting with terror at the smell of the predator. Behind them, the creature roared with frustrated rage as it realized its prey was escaping. They had maybe a 30-second head start before it broke free of the cabin completely. 30 seconds to get to the trail, 30 seconds before the real chase began. In the darkness ahead, Dead Man's Gulch waited like an open grave. Dead Man's Gulch opened before them like a wound in the earth. The narrow canyon walls rose 50 feet on either side, and the bottom was choked with decades of dead timber, twisted branches, fallen logs, and dried brush that crackled under their horses' hooves. Behind them, The creature crashed through the forest with the sound of falling trees. It was close enough now that they could hear its labored breathing, the scrape of its claws against stone, as it navigated the rocky approach to the gulch. "Light them all!" Liam shouted, touching his torch to the oil-soaked bundle Noah carried. "Light everything!" The torches blazed to life just as the creature appeared at the mouth of the gulch. In the flickering light, it looked even more massive than before, a prehistoric nightmare that had no business existing in their world. Its cold eyes reflected the flames as it paused at the canyon entrance, sensing the trap, but it was too late to turn back. They were its prey, and it had followed them too far to give up now. The creature charged into the gulch with a roar that echoed off the canyon walls. Liam threw his torch into the driest pile of timber he could see, and the dead wood caught fire instantly. Sophia and Zeke did the same, their torches arcing through the air to land in different sections of the gulch floor. Within seconds, the entire canyon was ablaze. The creature skidded to a halt as walls of flame rose around it, cutting off its escape routes. For the first time since this nightmare began, Liam saw something in those cold eyes that looked like fear. The massive predator spun in a circle, looking for a way out of the inferno they'd created. "It's working!" Zeke shouted over the roar of the flames. But the creature wasn't finished. Driven by desperation and rage, it charged straight through a wall of fire, its armored hide protecting it from the worst of the flames. It emerged on the other side, singed but very much alive, and fixed its burning gaze on the 4 humans who had dared to challenge it. Noah raised his rifle and fired his last bullet. This time, he aimed for the creature's eye, and his shot was true. The bullet struck the massive predator in its left eye, and it reared back with a scream of pain and fury that shook loose rocks from the canyon walls. Half blinded and surrounded by fire, the creature finally chose survival over pride. It turned and crashed through the flames toward the back of the gulch, seeking the path that would take it back to the deep swamp where it belonged. They watched from the canyon rim as the massive predator disappeared into the darkness beyond the flames, moving away from human territory for the first time in months. It was wounded, wary, and had learned that humans could be more dangerous than it had imagined. 3 days later, they returned to the Carter Ranch. The remaining cattle were safe in the far pasture, and no new tracks appeared near the swamp. The creature had retreated to the deepest parts of its domain, and the message was clear. As long as they respected its territory, it would respect theirs. Liam rebuilt his corral farther from the swamp line. Noah helped him string barbed wire along the property boundary, and sometimes on quiet nights when the wind was right, they could hear that low, rumbling call drifting across the water, but it never came closer than the sound. The Swamp King had learned to fear fire, and Liam Carter had learned that some battles could be won without destroying your enemy. You just had to teach them to respect you. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale, where courage and survival meet in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.
A soldier came home and bought a forgotten house no one wanted. But the moment he stepped into the overgrown backyard, his dog stopped, dead still, staring at what looked like an old termite mound covered in wild grass. He thought it was nothing, until the first storm came, and something metal surfaced from the earth. His dog began to dig. What they found had been buried for nearly 50 years. A rusted box, a soldier's uniform, a pistol, and letters. Letters that had waited decades for someone to read them. Who was Daniel Whitmore? Why did he disappear after the war? And what secret was so dangerous that it had to be buried in silence? What happened next will make you hold your breath and believe that some dogs never forget what men try to. The morning air in rural Alabama still carried the chill of early spring. A fine mist curled over the red clay fields, and the wind moved slowly, like an old man reluctant to wake. Clouds hung low, casting a gray veil over the broken roofs and rusted mailboxes that lined the county road. In a town too small for traffic lights, silence wasn't absence. It was tradition. Michael Harris stood at the edge of his new yard, boots sunk slightly into the damp earth. He had just turned 35, though his gray-streaked hair and the lines beneath his eyes made him look older. His lean frame was wrapped in a faded army green jacket that had followed him through 5 tours, and his hands, calloused, steady, gripped the strap of a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder. A quiet man, Michael spoke only when necessary. He had learned that on the battlefield, but it had started long before. Losing his brother in Kandahar had carved something permanent into his chest, a hollow space that never quite refilled. At his heel walked Rex, his 9-year-old German shepherd, a veteran in his own right. Rex had a powerful, weathered build with a thick sable coat streaked with gray. His left ear stood straight while the right flopped, torn from a shrapnel wound long ago. His eyes, a deep amber, held a constant alertness, like he never really left combat. Michael had bought the property for $8,000, a steal, the real estate agent had said, even if it had some history. It was a small, one-story house, paint peeling, porch boards warped, chimney leaning slightly like it had given up halfway. The backyard was wilder, as if the forest behind it had begun reclaiming the land. Tall weeds and ragged grass stretched waist-high in places. Rusted tools lay forgotten beneath a skeletal workbench, and a chain-link fence bowed under years of neglect. But it was the mound near the far corner that caught Rex's attention. It was no more than 3 feet tall, round like a loaf of risen bread, crusted and pale, with tufts of yellowing grass growing in a lopsided ring around it. It looked like an old termite mound, long abandoned and half swallowed by time. Rex froze. His posture stiffened. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Michael raised a brow. "What is it, boy?" Rex didn't move. He stared at the mound as if it had moved. Michael stepped closer and squatted beside it. He ran his hand along the earth. It felt oddly firm, not the crumbling kind you'd expect, but it was probably nothing, maybe an old tree root, or the foundation of some shed long gone. "Relax," Michael muttered, giving Rex a soft pat. "You're seeing ghosts." But Rex didn't blink. They went inside. The living room still smelled faintly of mildew and mouse droppings. Michael had started cleaning the week before, sweeping the dust, clearing the cobwebs, patching up cracked windows. A box fan buzzed on the floor, trying to chase out the stale air. Later that afternoon, as he worked on replacing part of the porch railing, a familiar voice called from behind the gate. "Michael Harris?" He turned. Standing there was Mrs. Evelyn Moore, his new neighbor from 2 houses down. She was in her late 60s, a short, apple-shaped woman in a floral windbreaker, with steel-gray hair tied in a bun and hands that looked like they'd known hard work. Her eyes were sharp, though, the kind that missed nothing. "Yes, ma'am," Michael said politely, setting down the hammer. Evelyn walked in like she'd known the yard longer than he had. "I saw the moving truck last week, but didn't want to bother you." Her tone was brisk but warm, the kind of Southern woman who told you her opinion whether you asked or not, but brought you pie anyway. "I just wanted to say welcome. I was real sorry to hear about your brother. Folks here remember him." Michael nodded with a faint smile. "Thank you." Her eyes drifted to the back of the yard. "I see the mound's still there." Michael tilted his head. "You know about it?" "Oh, honey," she sighed, arms crossed. "That house used to belong to a man named Daniel Whitmore. Quiet fella. Vietnam vet. Moved here in the mid-70s. Real private. Then one day, in 1980, gone. No goodbyes. No note. Just vanished." Michael said nothing, but Rex stood behind him, still facing the mound. "Sheriff poked around but never found anything. They just said maybe he left town. But he wouldn't leave without that old truck of his. I saw it parked out front for weeks." Her eyes lingered on the mound again. Michael glanced back toward it. "And no one ever dug there?" Evelyn shook her head. "People don't like disturbing things they don't understand." She smiled then, as if to soften her words. "But I'm sure it's nothing. Just an old piece of ground. Probably just a stump under there or a cement drain. Anyway, I'll let you settle in. If you ever need sugar or stories you didn't ask for, you know where to find me." As she turned to go, Rex let out a low whine. Just once. Michael looked at him, then at the mound, and for the first time since arriving he felt like he wasn't alone in the yard. Not quite, not fully, just watched. Rain fell hard through the night, a steady drumming on the tin roof that masked every creak and rustle of the old house. Michael lay awake longer than he wanted to admit, not from nightmares. Those had dulled over the years, but from a sense of weight in his chest, something unshaped and lingering. By morning, the clouds had thinned into drifting mist, and the sun came reluctantly over the tree line. Rex was already at the back door when Michael entered the kitchen. The dog's ears were high, tail stiff, body leaned toward the yard with a tension that wasn't curiosity. It was concern. Michael followed his gaze to the far corner of the property. The mound. It looked different. He stepped outside, boots squishing in the soaked grass. Rex moved ahead, low to the ground. As they neared, Michael saw what had changed. The rain had caused part of the mound to erode, revealing the edge of something, a dull, rusted surface just barely peeking out of the earth. Rex stopped 3 feet away and let out a deep, guttural bark. Then another. He lunged forward, claws tearing through the wet dirt. His body trembled with urgency, like instinct had taken over. "Hey!" Michael called, moving fast. "Rex, stop!" But Rex didn't listen. His front paws were already muddy, digging fast. Then, as if not trusting Michael's delay, the dog turned and pulled at the hem of his jeans with his teeth, tugging twice, eyes wide, sharp with something Michael hadn't seen in years. Raw, alert fear. Michael dropped to one knee. He touched the metal. Cold, despite the morning warmth. Solid. Definitely not stone or pipe. A chill ran through him. He stood, staring down at the mound, rainwater still pooling around its base. The logical part of him whispered, buried debris, maybe some old septic tank, maybe part of a trailer frame. But something deeper in his bones, the same part of him that had once sensed when a roadside had been too quiet in Kandahar, whispered back, no. Before he could process further, the gate creaked open. A small voice called out, "Hi, Mr. Michael!" Turning, he saw Sophie, the girl from 2 doors down. She was around 10, petite and narrow-shouldered, with a wild nest of dirty blonde curls under a bike helmet, and front teeth still uneven from recent loss. She wore a faded pink jacket 2 sizes too big and pushed her bicycle by the handlebars, with a slight limp in her right foot. "Can I say hi to Rex?" she asked, already halfway across the yard. Michael nodded. "Sure. Just be careful. It's muddy." Rex turned, instantly softened, tail swaying as he padded toward her. She dropped to her knees and scratched behind his ears like it was her morning routine. "You're his favorite," Michael said with a tired smile. Sophie grinned, then looked past him. "Is that weird dirt thing?" She pointed to the mound. "I told my friends it looks like a monster egg." Michael raised an eyebrow. "A monster egg?" "Yeah," she said, completely serious. "People say your backyard's haunted." Michael blinked. "Haunted?" She nodded and leaned in like she was sharing a family secret. "My friend Kelsey said her uncle's friend used to deliver groceries here when she was little. Said a man lived here, but one day he was just gone. Nobody saw him leave, and his truck was still in the carport for months." Michael's chest tightened. Evelyn had said something similar, but hearing it from the mouth of a child, repeated like folklore, made it settle deeper. "Was this man's name Daniel?" he asked. Sophie shrugged. "Dunno. My mom says we shouldn't talk about things we don't understand. She gets nervous when I ride past this house." Michael exhaled slowly. "Well, there's no monsters here, just rain and mud." Sophie looked at Rex. Rex knows if something's bad. Dogs always know. Michael watched as Rex nudged his head into her palm, then turned back toward the mound again. One long glance. The feeling hadn't left. Sophie stayed for a while longer, telling Rex about school and a poem she had to memorize. Michael mostly listened in silence, head half in the conversation and half anchored to the thing behind him. When Sophie finally left, promising to bring Rex a biscuit tomorrow, Michael turned back to the exposed metal. He crouched down again, scraped a few handfuls of dirt aside. The surface was flat, painted once, now stripped to rust and corrosion. He couldn't tell how large it was or how deep it went, but this wasn't a rock. This wasn't some piece of trash. He brushed his hand along the edge again. It made a soft clang. Rex stood beside him. "All right," Michael whispered. "You've made your point." He didn't dig further that day. He didn't know why, but some quiet instinct told him, not yet. That evening he stayed out on the porch long after the sun had dipped below the trees. Rex sat at his feet, unmoving. The wind had picked up slightly, enough to rattle the loose tin siding and hum through the chimney bricks. But Michael wasn't thinking about the house. He was thinking about what waited beneath the soil, and why his dog knew to fear it. The next morning brought a deceptive calm to the yard, with the sun slicing through the mist in golden rays and robins chirping as though nothing strange had ever happened beneath the earth. But Michael knew better. His dreams had been scattered, fragmented images of rust and whispering voices. When he stepped onto the porch, shovel in hand, Rex was already pacing the edge of the yard, eyes fixed on the mound like a soldier guarding a perimeter. Michael tied his boots and crossed the lawn. The grass, though wet, was soft from yesterday's rain. But the mound's soil was different. It had dried overnight, forming a crust that felt like packed clay. He planted the shovel and pressed down hard. The blade barely pierced the surface. It took him nearly 20 minutes to loosen the topsoil, his breath turning short and sharp. Rex hovered nearby, pacing back and forth, occasionally letting out a low growl, tail stiff. Michael paused to wipe his brow. "You're making me nervous, buddy." Then a clang. The sound echoed through the silence like a dropped bell. Michael knelt, scraping dirt away with his hands. Beneath the layer of hard-packed earth was a metal box, large and rectangular, maybe 2 feet wide by 1.5 deep. Its corners were dented, and the top bore streaks of rust, but it held firm against his touch. He dug around the edges, loosening the ground until he could see nearly all of it. It had weight, whatever it was. There was no lock, just corrosion. His fingers brushed across faint letters etched into the lid, D. Whitmore, barely visible beneath the years. Michael's breath caught. That wasn't just a box, it was a name. He ran a hand through his hair. D. Whitmore. Could it be Daniel Whitmore? The soldier Evelyn had mentioned? The same man who had disappeared decades ago? Before he could process further, Rex barked. Loudly. Michael jerked up, instinctively looking toward the source of the sound. Rex was at the edge of the yard, by the old chain-link fence, growling at something, or someone, just out of sight. "Easy," Michael called, standing. A shadow moved beyond the fence. From the gravel side path a man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-60s. He wore a tan windbreaker, slacks that had seen better days, and carried a cane more for image than need. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and his face, weathered and angular, held a charm that looked deliberate, like a man used to negotiating his way out of uncomfortable rooms. The man raised a hand in casual greeting. "Morning. Didn't mean to startle you," he said, stepping closer to the fence. "Harold Grant. Live 2 blocks down, past the old mill. Thought I'd drop by and say welcome." Michael nodded slowly, his body tense. "Michael?" "Nice place," Harold continued, eyes wandering past Michael too deliberately to the mound behind him. "Didn't think anyone would ever move into this old ghost plot." "Why's that?" Michael asked. Harold gave a soft chuckle. "Oh, just rumors. You know small towns. That backyard's been the subject of a dozen ghost stories and at least 2 drunk confessions." Michael said nothing. Rex, meanwhile, stood between them like a drawn line. Silent but rigid, ears back, gaze locked on Harold like he was made of lies. Harold chuckled again, this time more forced. "Your dog doesn't like me much." "He's a good judge of character," Michael said without smiling. There was a pause. Harold tapped his cane against the fence. "Well, if you ever need help fixing up the place, I used to be a contractor. Still got tools. Hell, I helped lay down the foundation for this house back in the 80s. Michael blinked. "You knew the guy who lived here before?" Harold shifted slightly. "Sort of. Daniel Whitmore. Saw him around. Real quiet type. Kept to himself. And then one day, poof, gone. Left the house locked, truck untouched. Cops did what they could, but you know how that goes." Michael looked at him a moment longer. "Did you know him well?" Not really, Harold said too quickly, then added, just enough to say hi. He glanced again at the back of the yard. Say, what's that old mound back there? It wasn't always there, was it? Michael stiffened. Just dirt. Maybe from an old tree root or something. Harold nodded, then shrugged like it didn't matter. Well, welcome again. You picked a hell of a fixer-upper. Michael didn't respond. He waited until Harold turned and walked off before speaking again. Rex stayed stiff as stone until the man disappeared around the corner of the property. Michael exhaled hard. Then he turned back toward the box. He ran his fingers across the name again. D. Whitmore. Why was it buried here, and why did Harold Grant care so much? He didn't have answers yet, but he had questions now, and something told him Rex had been right to bark. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Michael's kitchen, casting a muted glow over the wood floorboards. The air felt heavier than usual, dense with memory and meaning. On the table sat the box he'd unearthed, the one etched with the name D. Whitmore. He'd spent half the night staring at it, unsure whether to open it. The tension in his chest hadn't faded, not even after Harold's departure. Something about that man's interest lingered, oily and invasive. Michael trusted Rex's instincts more than his own lately, and Rex had not liked Harold one bit. With a slow breath, Michael reached for the rusted lid and pried it open. A metallic creak echoed in the stillness of the house. Inside, wrapped carefully in faded olive-green cloth, was a folded military uniform, meticulously preserved despite the years. On top of it lay a standard-issue sidearm, a Colt .45 its surface dulled with time, but still dignified. Below that was a paper envelope, yellowed and sealed with a fragile wax stamp. At the bottom, tucked beside the fabric, sat a pair of dog tags, slightly tarnished but still legible. Daniel Whitmore, U.S. Army. Michael's fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. The seal broke with a brittle crack, and inside, written in neat but urgent cursive, was a letter, to whoever finds this box. If you're reading this, it means they didn't get to it first. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I served in Vietnam from 1969 to 1974. I came home with secrets I wasn't supposed to carry. There were things we were ordered not to talk about. But I did. I told one man. And after that, the threats began. Letters. Unmarked cars parked near my home. A warning disguised as kindness. I buried this box the day I realized I was being followed. If they found it, I'd be erased like the others. So I disappeared before they could make me disappear for good. If you have this, be careful. Don't trust anyone too quickly. And for God's sake, don't let them know you found it. D. Whitmore. Michael sat back in his chair, stunned. The words rattled something deep in his chest. As a veteran himself, he'd carried his own ghosts, but this was something else. A man driven into hiding by his own country? Or was it paranoia? He didn't know yet, but something told him to believe Daniel. Rex, who had been lying by the back door, stirred. The German shepherd stood, ears pricked. His coat, though grizzled with age, still held its proud sable sheen. Scars lined his hind leg, remnants of a roadside bomb years ago, and his left ear bent permanently from shrapnel. But his instincts remained razor-sharp. He approached Michael, sniffed the open box, then nudged the jacket with his snout. "Careful," Michael murmured. But Rex didn't stop. He pawed at the coat, then bit gently at the inner lining. Something crinkled. Michael leaned in, frowning. "What is it, boy?" From inside the jacket's inner pocket, Rex tugged free a small, folded slip of paper, almost brittle from time. Michael opened it carefully. On it, in hastily written pencil, were just a few chilling words. "Don't let anyone find this box. They'll come back." Michael swallowed hard. Rex whined, as if sensing the shift in mood. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a footlocker of old belongings. It was a warning buried in time. Later that afternoon, he made his way across the gravel path toward the neighbor's porch. Evelyn Moore was sitting outside in a rocking chair, wearing her signature oversized sun hat and a cardigan, even though the sun was warm. She was in her mid-80s, with hair as white as milkweed and eyes that had seen too much. Her voice always held a kind of hush, as though everything she said was being measured against some unseen past. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said when Michael approached. He gave a slight smile. "I think I've met one." She raised a brow. "I found something buried in the yard. Belonged to a man named Daniel Whitmore. Does that name mean anything to you?" Evelyn's face shifted, subtly but unmistakably. She stopped rocking. "Daniel," she said slowly. "Yes, I remember him. Quiet man. Moved in right after the war, around 75. Kept to himself. Nice, though. Always trimmed the hedges. Played jazz on the porch some nights." "What happened to him?" Evelyn looked out at the field. "He vanished. Summer of 1980. No one ever found a body, no sign of a struggle. It was like he folded into the wind." Michael hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he left on purpose?" "I think," she said carefully, "Daniel was scared. He came back different. Not just war-sick, truly afraid. He'd look over his shoulder even in daylight, said things were still watching him." "Who?" Michael pressed, but Evelyn just shook her head. "He never said." Rex sat quietly beside Michael, his body still, but his eyes never left Evelyn's face. She looked down at him and softened. "Your dog, he's sharp. Keeps you safe?" Michael nodded. "Always." "You'll need that," she murmured. "If the box is open, then something's been let out. I don't mean ghosts, son. I mean curiosity. And curiosity around here gets noticed." Michael stayed silent. Evelyn gave him a final, knowing look, then turned her eyes back to the rocking horizon. As Michael and Rex walked back home, wind rustled the grass like a whispered name. The world hadn't changed since he opened the box, but the weight of it felt heavier. And behind them, somewhere just beyond the trees, a black sedan sat parked beneath the shade, engine silent, windows tinted too dark for the day. The Alabama sky had taken on a strange stillness by dusk, like it was holding its breath. Crickets had gone quiet. Even the breeze that usually stirred the tall grass around Michael's backyard was absent. Inside the dimly lit kitchen, Michael sat at the table, the opened letter from Daniel Whitmore laid out before him, its final line repeating in his mind like a pulse. "Don't let anyone find this box. They'll come back." Rex lay by the back door, his ears twitching with alertness, eyes fixed on the shadows gathering beyond the fence line. The German shepherd's usual calm had shifted since the box was unearthed. Every sound set him on edge. Every unfamiliar scent made him rise. He was 10 years old now, battle-worn and scarred, but his instincts hadn't dulled. The first bark came just past midnight. Sharp, guttural, urgent. Michael shot up, knocking his chair to the floor. Rex was already at the back door snarling, his whole body bristling. Through the glass, Michael spotted it, a figure, motionless, standing at the far edge of the yard, half concealed behind the unkempt wooden fence. The shape wasn't moving. It was watching. Michael rushed outside, flashlight in hand, but by the time the beam cut through the dark, the figure was gone. In its place were fresh boot prints in the soil, and something else, tire marks, etched deep in the gravel near the driveway. Recent. Unmistakable. He scanned the road. Nothing but empty blacktop curling into the trees. Whoever had come wasn't here anymore, but they had been. "Good boy," he whispered to Rex, who stood planted and growling softly at the fence line. The next morning, Sophie came skipping down the road with a worn backpack slung over her shoulder and a bouquet of dandelions in hand. The 10-year-old girl had become a daily visitor lately, drawn by Rex's presence more than anything. She was small, freckled, with untamable red curls and a smile that seemed too wide for her thin face. Her sneakers were always dirty, and her elbows often bore the badges of some minor adventure scrapes, scratches, stains of living wildly. "You should keep your gate locked," she said without a greeting, eyeing the gravel with suspicion. "My grandpa says weird folks drive through here at night." Michael gave a nod, crouching to examine the tire tracks again. You ever see anyone? Sophie wrinkled her nose. Not at night, but a man came by the school the other day, asked Miss Fielder about your house, said he was an old friend of Mr. Daniel's. Michael's spine stiffened. Did you catch his name? She shook her head. But he had a mustache, kinda yellow, like he smoked a lot. He asked if anyone new moved in. When Miss Fielder said a soldier bought it, he didn't say anything else, just left. Michael felt the old military instinct rising, the one that taught you when a perimeter had been breached. Someone knew he'd found the box. Someone who cared enough to sniff around a school, around a child. Sophie pulled a biscuit out of her pocket and offered it to Rex, who took it gently. So, she added casually, a man followed me yesterday. Michael turned sharp. What? Down by Old Mill Street, she said, still petting Rex. He was walking behind me for a while, then he stopped when Rex barked, real loud. Michael crouched to her level, voice low but firm. Sophie, if anyone follows you again, you run straight here or home. You understand? She nodded, suddenly serious. Later that afternoon, Michael walked the path Sophie had mentioned. Old Mill Street was mostly abandoned cracked sidewalks and rusted mailboxes. A perfect place for someone to blend into nothing. He found fresh boot prints near a telephone pole and a crushed cigarette still warm beneath his boot. The sun dipped low, setting the sky aflame with burnt orange and crimson. As Michael and Rex returned to the house, a figure stepped from behind a tree. Harold Grant. He wore a beige windbreaker, his thinning blonde hair swept back from a wrinkled forehead. The mustache Sophie mentioned. There it was, tobacco-stained and twitching nervously. Evening, Harold said with a smile too wide to trust. Michael kept his tone even. You back for another chat? Harold shoved his hands into his pockets. Just thought I'd check in. Curious about that box you found. Any treasures in it? Michael didn't answer. Harold leaned a little closer. You know, some things are best left buried. Soldiers like you, sometimes you bring ghosts home. Maybe don't dig too deep. Rex moved between them, growling. Harold chuckled nervously and backed away. Smart dog. Michael didn't speak. He just watched as Harold disappeared back down the road, his shadow stretching long behind him. That night, Michael stood in the living room staring at the box. Beside him, Rex sat like a statue. Somewhere outside, the wind howled, and a distant sound, a car door slamming, echoed down the hill. The Alabama morning sun cut through the fog like a blade, streaking gold across the weathered porch as Michael sat with the box on his lap. The house was silent, but his thoughts roared. The cracked leather of his old combat boots tapped the wooden floor in rhythm with his pulse. He'd seen war, betrayal, and loss. But this was different. This was a ghost refusing to stay buried. Rex sat directly in front of the box, unmoving, his amber eyes locked on Michael. The German shepherd, 10 years old, sable coat dusted with silver, had barely left the box's side since the night Harold Grant reappeared. His posture was rigid, one bent ear twitching at the slightest noise. If dogs could speak, Rex would have already shouted, "This matters." Michael ran a hand through his short brown hair, streaked with gray. The thought had weighed on him all night. Should he keep the contents of the box quiet, protect whatever truth Daniel had hidden, or report it? The letter had warned of danger. The visits from Harold, Sophie being followed. These weren't coincidences, but if Daniel Whitmore had truly been hunted for knowing too much, then someone out there still cared what he knew, and that meant Michael was sitting on a loaded gun. He reached for his phone and paused, thumb hovering. Then he tapped the name. Dean Wallace. Dean had been a supervising agent with the FBI when Michael was still enlisted. The man was sharp, dark-skinned, bald, with a salt-and-pepper beard, and known for his no-nonsense approach to national security. He had a slow, commanding voice that made people shut up and listen. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. Dean picked up on the second ring. Rhodes? Yeah, it's me. I need a favor. 10 minutes later, Michael had relayed the entire story, minus the money, for now. The rusted box, the uniform, the letter, the name, Daniel Whitmore. Dean was quiet for a moment, then said, Daniel Whitmore was scheduled to testify in 1980 in a case that went nowhere. Arms smuggling linked to rogue military contractors using leftover Vietnam supply lines. The morning of the trial, he vanished. Dead? Michael asked. No body, no witnesses. We assumed he ran or was eliminated, but nobody found him. You're telling me he buried everything behind your house? Michael looked down at Rex, who still hadn't moved. Not just that, he said. There's more. After the call ended, Michael pried deeper into the box. The inside was more layered than he had thought. As he turned it over carefully, a dull clink caught his attention. Rex stood up immediately, sniffing around the base. Michael felt around and found a loose metal plate beneath the box's bottom seam. It came off with a little pressure, and behind it, tucked tight, was a small canvas pouch. It smelled of mildew and old sweat. Inside were bundles of cash, faded greenbacks held together by disintegrating rubber bands. He counted silently. 10, 20, $30,000, maybe more. But what stopped him wasn't the money, it was the seal on the bills. They bore the name of a bank that had gone bankrupt in 1976. Why would a soldier hide money from a dead bank? He muttered. Rex growled low. Not hostile, just insistent. Michael took a breath. This wasn't just some old man's secret. It was something someone wanted badly enough to follow a child, to stand in the dark behind his fence, to sniff around a school pretending to be a friend. Dean called back that evening. I pulled the files. Daniel's testimony would have implicated several high-ranking officials, some of whom went on to work in private defense sectors. Most are dead or retired, but one name might still matter. Richard Lyle. Michael didn't know the name. Dean continued. He owns a logistics firm in Georgia, used to be quartermaster in Vietnam, controlled inventory shipments. He vanished from the case file after Daniel disappeared. Michael exhaled slowly. So, what now? Dean's voice lowered. Now, I come to you. That night, Michael locked the box inside an old trunk in his attic. He couldn't shake the thought that eyes might still be watching. He drew the curtains, installed a new lock on the back gate, and as the wind picked up outside, carrying the scent of rain, he sat on the floor beside Rex. You knew, he whispered. You always know. Rex nudged his hand and laid his head on Michael's knee. By the time the sun rose over the rolling fields of rural Alabama, the once-forgotten farmstead had transformed into an active federal scene. Black SUVs with tinted windows lined the dirt road. A mobile FBI command post hummed near the barn. Agents in Navy windbreakers swept through the property, marking evidence and photographing the rusted box, the soil around the mound, and every inch of the back fence where the intruders had previously stood. Dean Wallace stepped out of his SUV, a tall, commanding figure in his early 60s. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a tailored navy suit, his salt and pepper beard trimmed close, and his eyes sharp beneath the brim of a low cap. He moved with quiet authority, radiating calm amidst the chaos. Michael met him halfway across the porch. "Morning," he said. Dean nodded. "Place hasn't changed much since the Cold War, has it?" "No, but the ghosts got louder." Inside the house, the rusted box sat on the table, now surrounded by agents. The uniform had been gently unfolded and sealed in a bag. The letter, photographs, and Daniel's old sidearm had all been documented. What stunned Dean most was the untouched integrity of the evidence. "This box," he murmured, "is 30 years of silence in a single breath." Michael nodded grimly. "And someone doesn't want it to be heard." As the team prepared to secure the area for forensic work, Dean pulled Michael aside. "We traced Daniel Whitmore's last known contact. 2 weeks before his trial, he wrote a letter to a retired colonel. He was afraid. He mentioned names that were scrubbed from the final case file, names that still carry weight." Just then, Rex, now wearing a new bandana Sophie had given him that morning, perked up his ears. His tail stiffened, hackles rising. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat. Michael turned. "What is it, boy?" A sharp whistle rang out through the trees. Then it happened fast. A gray pickup truck burst through the far tree line behind the property, speeding toward the house. Two men in dark clothing jumped from the bed before it even stopped, weapons in hand. A third scrambled around the side gate, heading toward the house. "Down!" Dean shouted, drawing his weapon. Agents moved quickly, but the attackers were desperate and reckless. One fired a warning shot into the air. Michael grabbed Sophie, who had been sitting on the porch sketching Rex, and pulled her inside. The sound of barking and shouting filled the air. Rex lunged. Without hesitation, the German Shepherd sprinted down the steps, straight toward the man aiming at Dean. The attacker faltered at the sight of the massive dog barreling toward him. He fired once, the shot grazing Rex's side, but Rex didn't stop. He leapt, teeth bared, and latched onto the man's arm. The gun clattered to the ground. Dean tackled the man just as Rex drove him backward into the dirt. The second assailant tried to circle around toward the barn. Another agent intercepted him. The third, still running, was caught at the tree line by two agents in tactical gear. It was over in under 5 minutes. Dean cuffed the wounded man, his voice cold. "You picked the wrong place, friend." Michael dropped beside Rex, checking his side. Blood stained the dog's fur, but the wound was shallow. "You crazy mutt," he whispered, running a hand over Rex's head. "You saved our lives." Sophie peeked from the window, eyes wide. "He's a hero." Dean crouched beside them, breathing hard. These weren't amateurs. One of them had a fake badge NSA. These men were sent to recover the box or destroy it. Michael stood, anger tightening his voice. "And they would have killed a child to do it?" Dean nodded. "We'll take them in. We'll reopen the case." Later that day, local reporters caught wind of the incident. A camera crew arrived, and though Michael avoided speaking, the image of Rex bandaged and still alert made the evening news. The townsfolk gathered by dusk. Evelyn Moore stood near the gate with a cane in one hand and her worn cardigan buttoned all the way to her neck. She wiped tears from her eyes. "I always knew this land wasn't done talking," she whispered. By nightfall, someone had hung a handmade sign over Michael's front porch, "Home of the Four-Legged Hero." The sun over Alabama that morning was soft and golden, casting long shadows across the fields where summer wildflowers began to bloom. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. What once had been a haunting place, a backyard marked by secrets and fear, now felt like something sacred. Michael stood at the back of the house, staring at the spot where the termite mound-shaped patch had once stood. The earth was smooth now, the grass replanted, and in its center he had placed a stone ring, carefully filled with blooming black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers. A wooden sign staked in the soil simply read, "In memory of Daniel Whitmore, U.S. Army, 1946 to 1980. Rex lay beside the garden bed, his silver-flecked coat gleaming in the light. He was almost 11 now, his movements slower, but his eyes sharp and proud. Around his neck was a new collar made of sturdy black leather. Hanging from it was a brass tag, freshly engraved, Guardian. That morning, Sophie had come over in her usual cheerful way, swinging a cloth bag. "It's not much," she had said shyly, her freckled cheeks red with excitement. "But I wanted him to have something. He saved me, remember?" Sophie, now more confident after the incident with the stranger weeks ago, had become a regular visitor. She was tall for her 10 years, always in oversized sweaters and with untied shoelaces. Her parents, especially her mother Rachel, a quiet woman with tired eyes and a warm voice, had been grateful beyond words. Rachel had even started bringing over small dishes, peach cobbler, biscuits, or her famous cornbread. Inside the house, things had changed too. The once dusty rooms now gleamed with life. Michael had painted the walls pale blue, hung up pictures of his old platoon, and added a bookshelf filled with war history, poetry, and books Sophie had given him. On a shelf near the window sat the weathered box now empty next to a framed copy of Daniel's letter. A second frame held the dog tag, D. Whitmore, still slightly rusted but preserved behind glass. Michael never forgot what Dean had told him during the FBI debriefing. Daniel had a choice. He could have vanished and stayed hidden forever, but instead he buried the truth where he hoped someone with a good heart and a good dog might one day find it. Dean Wallace had kept his word. The items discovered Daniel's uniform, his letter, the old handgun, and the faded banknotes were now part of a permanent exhibit at the Alabama Veterans History Museum. Michael had attended the opening ceremony just last week. The local paper had called it "A Soldier's Secret Unearthed by a K-9 Hero." The story had spread gently across the town and beyond. What surprised Michael most was the invitation. The museum director, a thin, meticulous woman named Grace Allen, had asked him personally, "Would you consider being a guest speaker for our younger visitors? They'd learn more from you than from any textbook." Grace was in her early 60s, with cropped silver hair and a voice that carried confidence without harshness. She had served as a military nurse in the 80s, and there was a quiet strength in how she stood. When she'd shaken Michael's hand, she had added, "Men like Daniel often get forgotten. You and Rex reminded us why their stories still matter." Michael agreed, though not right away. It took him a week and a long walk with Rex through the foggy pine trees behind his property. It wasn't the speaking part that made him nervous, it was the act of remembering out loud. But then he saw Sophie trying to explain Daniel's story to a group of kids at the library, holding the newspaper article with pride, her small finger tracing over Rex's picture saying, "He's not just a dog. He's the kind that remembers." That night, Michael sat down, lit a candle, and began writing the speech. Not as a soldier, but as a man who once came home looking for silence and found a voice buried in the soil. As the season turned, the garden behind his house became something of a local secret. Neighbors stopped by, some bringing flowers, others just to sit and think. Someone left an old pair of dog tags once, no name, just a date and the word brother. Michael didn't ask questions. He let the soil keep its whispers. One morning, as he drank his coffee and watched Rex sunbathe by the flowers, Dean visited one last time. The agent had aged more than Michael remembered gray in his beard, a stiffness in his gait. They sat on the back porch in silence before Dean finally said, "You know, most people would have just buried it again." Michael looked down at Rex, whose ears flicked as a bird chirped in the distance. "Not when he was watching," Michael replied. Dean nodded, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Not everyone's meant to unearth the past, but some of us are just stubborn enough to do it right." They stood together as the wind picked up. The petals from the cone flowers danced into the air, catching the light like tiny sunbursts. Michael smiled. The house wasn't just a place now. It was a witness, a monument, a home. Sometimes the ones who guide us back to truth don't speak our language. They bark, they wait, they protect. Rex was more than a dog. He was a guardian, a messenger, and a bridge between past and present. Through instinct, loyalty, and courage, he uncovered a truth buried for decades and helped a broken soldier find purpose again. But maybe it wasn't just instinct. Maybe it was God working through a wounded canine to remind us that nothing truly good is ever lost. It's just waiting to be found, by the right heart at the right time. In a world that often feels loud and dark, may we all have the eyes to see, the faith to act, and the courage to dig deeper, even when the soil is hard and the truth uncomfortable. Because healing sometimes begins with the quiet nudge of a loyal companion, and a whisper only the soul can hear. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes that animals are more than pets. They are protectors, healers, even angels in fur. Comment "Amen" below if you believe that God still works in mysterious ways, and sometimes sends his miracles with 4 paws and a scarred heart. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that remind us of the power of love, loyalty, and the quiet miracles happening all around us. May God bless you and every soul who watches this.